It's 10 o'clock on October 18th. This is the Capital Projects Workshop. Entire board is here and our mayor is here. And I think is Mike monitoring? He's not monitoring this. He'll be available for the executive.
Yeah, by phone.
Okay. All right. Well, Austin, why don't you kick it off? And you've done a lot of work, and it's been good work. Thanks for giving that to us and giving us time to review it.
So I think just to start, I think we should go why we're here. We've had a lot of new projects come to light. We've had cost increases on current projects just because of the labor market, the material market. We've had some administrative changes. Darren has now gone on. We also had Bob, who has retired. So I've sat down and talked with Rhett. I've gotten his plan on what he envisions for the electric side. So there's some stuff that's been added there. Obviously, we continue to look at ways of hardening our wastewater treatment plant and our wastewater facilities due to past failures. And then we also have the ability of funding mechanisms that are out there through the state and through the feds. So that is really why we've gotten to this point. What's in front of you is two different sheets. One is a straight cost sheet, which has all of the projects. And as Tom had just said, he has the old 10-year capital project list, which is about $33 million. There's a lot that's on here that was because of the funding and because of material, and we have an ongoing water study which will help validate a lot of the priority as far as projects go. I tried to incorporate as much of a cost as possible instead of having it just as a line item. So for example, Cedar on the previous budgets wasn't on as a actual cost proponent. Now there's $12 million associated with that project. And I've gone down and done that with, water, stormwater, sewer, electric, the wastewater treatment plant. So I'm more than happy to go down here line by line. I can go over what has changed. The general consensus is there's a lot of projects. I think one of the lines that I've heard is that we are the first town in the first state. And I think that goes into account for our utilities. We have a lot of older sections of town that we're working to put in new infrastructure to make sure that it holds up and take old infrastructure out that's been, problematic as time has progressed. And that's how we've gotten to where we are today with 5-year capital projects of about $44 million.
Aspirational.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Just one quick question.
Yep.
About the two that you've left off that are on here, the School Lane and DeVries.
Yes.
They're not really large projects. Why did we drop them? I know DeVries particularly has been around for an awfully long time. I don't remember how long School Lane has been around, but I know the people in DeVries had some questions and concerns over the years.
There's been several instances where we've had backups on the sewer side with DeVries. It's not been as prevalent. We've still had them pop up. I think the easiest way is that you look at the projects that are out there now, and you have projects that have taken priority. That's not trying to single any of them out, but there are ones that I think are becoming more and more problematic. And as we go through and we do our due diligence through the water study, we have now, and I'll use an example, a much larger scale, but we've always said Cedar was going to be the priority. And we don't know if it will be because we're still doing that project with a water study, but we did get a sample out of the Kings Highway water main when Big Oyster did their wet tap to put in their fire hydrant. And that line was very, very rusty. So there you have, it didn't coincide with our project, but we do have a sample of that line, which now to me takes that and bumps in priority since we don't know how Cedar looks at this time. And Cedar is a much larger project because it's an all-encompassing. We have a sewer project which incorporates both the lining of manholes over on Cedar and all of the side streets, and then you also have Politown Road. So that's one project, and then you have the Cedar. What we deem as water and sewer, we actually had we did a lot of work on the sewer side, and the sewer doesn't seem to be really as bad as what we originally anticipated. So we had those problem areas fixed by Teal, I believe. Teal or Harry Caswell, some of those problem areas.
On Cedar?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think it's been done, but it's just one.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're trying to make sure that, if we were to go in between the two, if you see the blue highlighted areas with the red bold lettering, those are anticipated possible funding projects that are larger of scale. For example, Cedar, Kings Highway, the water tower, bi-directional flow on Gills Neck Road, which is a mitigation project. Obviously, the headworks, which I've pushed to try and expand that out to include major pump station upgrades. And that's because we're having GHD start their work next week, coming in and taking a look. And we very well may see some large projects come about, manual bar screens in general. If they have any recommendations on changing out from grinders to non-clog flight pumps, whatever it may be, we may have some stuff associated with. So there's some fluff in there, and I think GMB can attest to this. The market right now is absolutely insane. I mean, you try and price out any pipe, they give you 5 days and that's it. And it's the same thing with labor. And then you throw in, and I think a lot of people have thought about this, but when you have the ARPA funds that now become and are going to be distributed as time progresses, you're going to have different municipalities fight for contractors because everybody's going to be getting the funding. So then you're going to have costs. It's going to be it's a competition. So it's great that the funding is there, but it's going to cost just as much, if not more. I mean, Teal just told us that PVC pipe and cast iron or ductile iron. Lead times. Yeah. From the day.
How much? 6 months.
Oh, my.
So what that's done to us is when we have our main capital projects and we set a construction schedule, we're beginning to now look like we want to bid at least a month or two ahead of what we were intending to bid so that we can get them under contract so they can order the pipe and the materials necessary. So when that construction schedule comes around, they've actually got to be bid.
I had another item. There are certain things, just few, and they're not really large, but things like nutrient trade and tree trimming and transformers, things like that. What shouldn't that be in the maintenance and operations budget rather than the capital budget? I know we used to have hydrants on here. I didn't see it this time, but it's something we do every year. Is that really a capital project, or is that really a maintenance thing for those types of items?
And
should that be in this budget?
And that's a question for the board. So what I did is I kept a lot of what was in here and kind of modified what needed to be modified. So if we can pull the nutrient trade out, and we banked it prior. So essentially we're just banking it. Tree trimming, we just threw in there because of the cost associated with it. We can throw that in O&M on the electric side. We originally, about a year and a half ago, we got prices from Asplin, original prices, and they were pretty good. But then Del Electric Co-op kind of takes priority, and Delmarva Power does, just because of how large they are as a customer. We got another bid from another company, and it was, I pretty much fainted when Rhett told me. So we went back to Asplin to try and get a better price. We just want to make sure that with the increase in storms coming through, especially in like the 3-phase areas, we wanted to look at doing a program where you start circuit 1, circuit 2, maybe 1 year, the following year, circuit 3, circuit 4, keep a year off, and then go back. So it's essentially a 3-year program as you progress.
And one last question. Mary, you've been talking about EV charging stations a lot. Just wondering, is that a BPW? Should that be a BPW project or should that be a city project? Like the, streetlights.
Right.
Should we, do you want to plan them and place them? And then
We're having the capital projects meeting on Thursday.
Mhm.
I think that's going to be a discussion point, how we're going to go about doing it and what kind of cooperative effort between the two of us.
Sure.
The two agencies we would do. So I think what we would be looking at is the possibility of putting EV stations in municipal lots, not on the street. And we certainly look to where is there already power. Like the 3rd Street lot already has power, readily accessible. In other places may not, but pretty much all of our municipal lots do have access. 1812 lot has access. So, but I think we'll get back to you on that.
yeah, I think it could go either way. I don't know.
Yeah, and how much, how many is another question. And with Ford and Volvo and all the vehicle manufacturers talking about disbanding the combustion engines, I think we're going to be pushed to do more. The 4 stations we have, we've noticed that, and you may have heard that in Anne Marie's report, that the usage has gone up considerably in the past year.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Where do you think the ARPA funds would most likely come in? for those projects?
So in my crystal ball, I would say water and wastewater, which is what they're geared towards. We're spending a lot in wastewater. I think DENREC, looking at the projects that we're outlaying, a lot of it has to do with fixing aging infrastructure in terms of our wastewater treatment plant and our pump station, lift station, but also looking at risk mitigation, having a bidirectional flow agreement with Sussex County in which we could take, just say it handles 60% of our flow to lift station 4, pump station 4, to be able to say if we get into an emergency and we lose the force main, that we could essentially turn some valving and send it back to the county. Through the same agreement, similar to what they have with Rehoboth, where they can do the same thing if they run into an issue. I think DENREC would look at that as a very high priority item because it's putting us out of harm's way, or it helps us get out of harm's way, and it helps DENREC get out of harm's way.
So, Charlie O'Donnell, WEAC has a meeting on Wednesday. Austin and I have spoken to Greg Pope over the last 3 weeks. There's $1 billion that the state has, ARPA money, but Greg, he runs the whole SRF program. He has no idea how that billion is going to filter down to the money that they'll be able to utilize for water and wastewater projects. There's supposed to be an update on that on Wednesday, so maybe we'll find out some more. We'll see. But I just want to let you know that meeting is on Wednesday for a possible update.
Great.
Do you think the update will provide some guidance on how to go through the process or what kind of information they're going to want?
I think once Greg knows how much money he's going to get from that $1 billion allotment, yes, he'll give us some idea of what the requirements are going to be. My gut is that it'll be very similar to the SRF loan process, where you actually have to go through at least a full application process. Right now, you do a pre-application and a full application, and the whole thing takes at least a year. Unless it's an emergency. But he would have to clarify on that, on the actual application process for the ARPA funds, if it's different.
Would you, knowing what you know, and you know a lot more than I do, would you suggest that we should start looking at things now and coming up with documentation on why this is important?
Oh, we've already done that. And we've already sent it all up to Greg.
Who's we?
Paulson and I. And my team.
The 43 million, and then there was a description that was added to the certain projects for justification on why they would be needed. Again, that was just saying, hey, look, we have $44 million in potential projects that we think, the reason why, they're being done and the reason why they could be funded.
A structure or presentation that's developed on, more granularity, or how does it typically work?
Well, for each project, you have to give the environmental benefits. They're actually looking as to whether they're going to add like social benefits and things of that nature now. And of course, each one of our projects has, like for instance, when we do Donovan Smith Mobile Home Park, how great a project is that we're eliminating that whole system out there, both water and sewer. which is so close to the board's well field. So right now, the way it is each individual project, you have to show the benefits, and that's part of how they rank it. There's certain things that they rank more importantly than others, like elimination of septic systems and things of that nature.
Should we start putting this together now with here's the reason why thing?
We can, again, I think it's going to be a free for all when that time comes. And we can put it,
I'd rather be ahead of the game than behind it though.
and we are, I feel like we are.
So what we did was remember last month we gave you the list of projects, and you guys said, hey, let's come up with the benefits. And so we did that, and also you guys talked about specifically would it have an effect on lead service lines on the water side. So we did that. We weren't able to put it into a nice compact spreadsheet. So we have the spreadsheet that we gave you last time, the total is like 45 million now. And then we have a series of 8 pages that has each individual project broken out with its project benefits to the community and to the board and to the environment, and also whether it's related to lead and water service. And all that got shipped up to DENREC, the funding environmental finance group, which Greg Pope runs. So he was very appreciative of that, by the way. Yeah.
But what I will also say is the way that it's currently structured, there's absolutely no way, and I know this, and I will be completely upfront, that we would be able to do all $45 million worth of the projects in the allotted time that they have currently.
Yeah, and if you had a crystal ball on that part of it, I would say that we wouldn't get all of our projects funded because every other.
Be
going for the money to it.
It's 20. I think you have the money allocated by 24 and spent by 26.
Okay.
Along those lines, there are two things, one of two things, or perhaps both things are going to have to happen. They either have, as Charlie's mentioned, they're either going to have to streamline the application process in order to get things done. And as you've already admired, there aren't enough contractors to do the work. So, and I've had this conversation with our federal delegation about what are they talking about pushing the deadline for completion out to? Because 26 is going to be here before we know it. And we've already seen, look at what's going on with what we're doing with the restrooms that we're building over at the Rollins Center. The contractor for that job is coming from Easton.
Yeah.
And the assisted living facility is being out here, is being built out here, out-of-state contractors, so Philadelphia area. So I think there just aren't enough contractors to do the work, let alone engineers. So I think they're going to have to look at how do we do this in a different way for a different timeline.
But is the decision made based on here's a list of the priorities, whatever it is, wastewater treatment or the pipe that goes under the canal? Is it as simple as a statement, or is it more like a presentation? How does that process work? How do you win, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, so they have a ranking system when you submit an application, and it's based on a lot of different things, including the environmental benefits, the cost of the project.
Can we get a list of the prioritization of the rankings?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So every year when you submit an application, and every other municipality does too, they put together what's called a project priority list, and it ranks them from 1 to, sometimes there's as many as 30 projects statewide. And that's fine that they rank them like that, but they only have a certain amount of money per year to utilize. So depending on the dollar amounts of all those, there's like a cutoff line threshold where they can fund these projects above that threshold, and the ones below just get carried over to the next year.
It sounds like there is a forced ranking that happens based on a set criteria.
So it is, and I can provide you with what that looks like in terms of what things are really, really important. We try to write our proposals to them, our applications, to really emphasize those things that are important to them.
Are there any other avenues for conversations with people and how to get these funds?
Yes. Kind of behind the scenes, like
Austin and I have been talking to Greg Pope and Laura Robbins from Denrec about the headworks in terms of we're going to be finishing the emergency SRF loan application today that Greg and Laura can take to the December Water Infrastructure Advisory Council. So that's like expediting the whole process. To answer your question, there are ways, and what we found best works for us is like Austin and I call up there and have these like face-to-face over telephone conversations to say, here's our situation, can you help us out? Most times they can, obviously. Strangely enough, sometimes they can't.
That's one of the things. For example, we just had that conversation with Greg, and Greg said that if we do decide, and obviously Charlie would wait for the board's direction, but for the emergency funding on the headworks, the way that it's set up is that not only Charlie and his team have designed the headworks upgrades, but also we have the second opinion coming in through GHD. But that whole project is about, I'd say, 4 to 6 weeks from going out to bid. And that is we put in there, or I put in there 1.75 million. And that is to include also any findings that both GHD and GMB come back with as far as bar screens at the head, or bar screens at like 4 and 8. If we want to change any of the pumps out, do we want to change any of the skate out? All those that get all encompassed into one large project, which is why we have an expedite schedule on certain aspects of our sewer system.
Our funding would probably be loans rather than grants at this point, or a combination.
It depends on the project, but everybody's aware of the Clean Water Initiative from the governor and how that's being utilized at Donovan Smith Mobile Home Park. We have another mobile home park in the area that's requested water and sewer service. So we've already reached out to the state as to whether we could receive funding through the Clean Water Initiative for that mobile home park, because that's kind of the emphasis of what the governor wants to use that funding for. So it depends a little bit on the project. Most of them fall out on low interest loans for sure, unless it's, how it works is that the project cost to the users and they, whatever it turns out to be, like what's the cost going to be to each one of those residents versus what their median household income is. And then if it's more than what they can afford, that's where the grant money comes into play. But each one's a little different.
Over the headworks issue, that's for basically all the citizens of Lewes and our other ratepayers. So
on the face of it, I would say it probably wouldn't be grant.
Yeah.
But I'm holding out hope against hope that because it is an emergency situation, that maybe Greg and Laura can come up with something on the grant side. Yeah.
It just seems like there's got to be another avenue to get this done. Whether it's talking to representatives or senators, or there's got to be another avenue to talk to people to advance our cause.
The Board of Public Works call it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the city of Lewes, but yes.
Hey, I don't have power in those circles, but I would. I certainly encourage you guys to do that for sure. The Cape Henlopen State Park, they've been wanting to get sewer extended out there so they can get out of the wastewater treatment business. And we've been working with them on that. And when that went through the whole process, it actually was the #1 ranked project in the state for funding. Just to give you an idea. But, certainly I would say that there's probably political, I don't know anything about politics, but there's certainly stuff happens sometimes, but certainly I think if people put pressure on certain groups inside Denver.
We're just trying to disperse information.
Yeah, I'm not talking about you putting pressure, but if the politicians in turn, reach out to Greg and his group, maybe something could happen. For sure.
I'd be willing to be involved in that press. I'm sure you would, who else we could do, but I would welcome the opportunity to figure that process out with somebody else on the board, obviously.
And that's because you guys are ahead of the game probably.
It doesn't feel that way, just so you know.
But you got your list of projects and you've got your benefits, and if it's lead and water, I mean, there's probably a lot of municipalities that don't even have that. So you can at least go to those legislators with that information and say, hey, it's really important to us, or, you know, however you want to do it.
It's a great idea.
Maybe, can you think of any? We could maybe just talk about that or whatever, but you know, there's all kinds of ways. Yeah.
Just a matter of what's going to be most effective.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you.
And to go along with that, you also have two sets of cash reserve policies. One cash reserve policy has you at a loss, and the other one has you at a gain. And I say as a gain is in the positives versus the negatives. If it's negatives, that means if like the board says this is the capital project list that we want to go with, and we don't really want to decide on funding yet, so we have $44 million sitting it all at one time, your cash reserve policy says your $2.5 million that you need to come up with to feed or replenish your reserve policy. That can be done through funding of projects, bonds, or rate increases. So that's why you have two sheets in front of you. One sheet has potential, like the capital project as is, 44 million. The other one has about 23 million in funding through a couple of different projects, Cedar, the water tower, bidirectional flow, those, and then you have a cash reserve policy that goes with each one. So if what it would look like if you did fund 23 million is that your cash reserve policy, as it stands right now, is perfectly fine, but it's not to say you still have to be able to fund the rest of your projects, which will, you will have an issue, or I foresee us having an issue, having a steady cash flow to fund
Future projects.
future projects. For example, you have 7.282 this year and continuing on for the next couple of years.
This is the cash reserve calculation historically used.
Yes.
You talked about some other approaches. Have you tightened that up a little bit?
Not in regards to the current policy. And when we get into the policy conversations, we can go into those kind of things in more detail.
So just, and Kim Rockstar did the cash reserve policy, but what we did was, and what she did was she took what our current cash flows were to date and then forecasted out the rest of the budget year to get us to where our 25% of working capital lag is. And then obviously took the capital budget information in and put those as placeholders in current depreciation. So that's how we got to the number that you see. And you have the total cash balance as of the end of September.
What kind of growth factor did you include in these calculations?
As far as,
We've got a lot of construction going on. So
well, we would have the growth in depreciation because every project we're doing is becoming increasingly more expensive, which means you're increasing your depreciation.
so you feel that one washes the other?
In a way, yes. I mean, we have, as far as projects goes, like one of the things that everybody, it's not revenue, but you have these projects that are coming online that you're going to have impact fees come in associated with. It's not a direct pass through in terms of, because those are restricted funds, the impact fees are only geared towards capacity. So those are the revenues associated with those are not factored in. And I use the word revenues because it is not what I would say is a guaranteed number, because you have a development that could be coming online, but that, you could have the market that takes a complete crash and that development just goes downhill and nothing comes up. So you can't really incorporate those as a factor.
But the new business, if you want to call it that, is paying for itself, right? I mean, pretty much paying for itself.
As far
And on
as
new developments, we're charging what it costs us,
well, we
at
have
least. And
we have
so,
costs that we are responsible for. So we pay for like an upsizing of pipe, and that's all spelled out in those developers agreements.
Those are the numbers that are reflected in Tower Hill.
Yes,
so that's in here already.
correct. But I like for
But the impact fee business and so forth.
absolutely not.
Because that's a charge that, I mean, in other words, we're getting paid for what we're doing.
And that's for future
Yeah,
capacity.
But I shouldn't use the term bet, but the idea is that additional capacity will be paid for at some point in the future
Yes,
for the development we anticipate,
yes,
rather than having to go back and
Right.
size everything.
yes.
So we basically approved something in the historically here for what, 23, $24 million, but we had a wish list that totaled $44 million.
Yeah, and Tom had the 10-year plan, which was about 33 or so million. And we've taken a lot of those projects that were on the 5-year and moved them up because of funding and priority. And that's how we got to 44 million. A lot had to do with like the headworks and looking at more mitigation measures, especially like on the wastewater treatment plant side. You have the water tower in there, and we now have since purchased the Jones Farm in coordination with the city and Sussex County. So we have the allocated spot for the water tower, but we haven't really determined sizing, and we haven't done any of the engineering, really. I shouldn't say that. We've done preliminary engineering, but not anything in depth.
So there's different approaches.
Yes.
Right. So we never agreed to 44
No,
as a
no,
team.
nope.
So there's things in here that are in here like AMI that wasn't technically put in, but was agreed to something we wanted to look at.
Discussed.
Yes. So how do we get to a reasonable amount? Right. So we could, and we had this conversation earlier, we could send this to
Todd?
UFS.
Yeah, and say, hey, do us for 44, do us for 23, and let us know what we need to do wage-wise, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or we could winnow down this list or prioritize this list and give her something that's may take another meeting out of the need, if you know what I mean. But it's probably still a 2-meeting process regardless. What's your recommendation on how to get to the end of this line?
So I tried to put as a I don't want to say worst case scenario, but the most realistic approach. If we have the water study that comes back and says, yes, these projects are priority, meaning Cedar, that's a huge project. That's $12 million. If it comes back and it looks more along the lines of, hey, it's really not in that bad a shape, and that gets pushed off, 5 or 6 years, that 12 million isn't something that you eat in the next 5 years. A lot of the differences between previous capital budgets and this capital budget is we actually put costs in there for projects that we assumed were going to be down the road that we've now moved up. So that's where you have this large jump. And then we also have the wastewater treatment plant stuff come into play. I think that discussion on prioritizing those projects should happen sooner rather than later. It's probably going to be one of the hardest conversations that the board has because you have to pick priorities. What I'm trying to do is get you enough data to be able to make those decisions. And that's through a water study that prioritizes pipes. Obviously,
we have the coupons from the different pipes.
we are having a meeting next week to prioritize where exactly we're going to do those, when they're going to happen. I'm hoping that I can probably have something finished up end of the year-ish. We have a price, individual price for each one of those coupons. And like, for example, we have
Calendar or fiscal?
calendar. That's what I'm shooting for. But like I said, I put those projects on here, assuming that it was going to happen. So if they don't happen, that's only helping you, not hurting you.
Hey, let me ask you this. We just flushed the hydrants a couple weeks ago. And I noticed in the past years, and maybe it's just, I don't know what the difference would be, is I used to notice quite a bit of iron on the pavement, on the roadway after flushing at the intersections of Cedar. I didn't notice it as much this year. Was that noticed, or was that just me?
No, I actually had the same conversation with Emmett after he had flushed, and we actually sat down and asked him which projects would be priority, and he said Kings over Cedar. That's just off the cusp, because we have physical evidence from actually have two. We have one from the connection at Kings and Madison, and we also have one that was down at Big Oyster. Both of those show proof that is a rusty line, and we actually flushed that brand new hydrant, and it was rusty. And it's old. Cedar was surprisingly very clean. Yeah. Cleaner than we've really ever seen it, which is why it's.
I mean, down at my cul-de-sac, which is PVC, but anything. Yeah, I had no, I turned it on right away after you finished and let it run and run, nothing.
We're doing a damn good job, right?
You are. I know what you're doing.
So, one of the items on one where you have the projects pulled out for external funding. I see it's, it's a 2% loan is what we're assuming. Do we have dollar values as to what it's going to cost us?
Yeah, if you look at that page where it has the zero, all the dollar figures as being zero, if you go to the very bottom, it shows you what the debt service payment would be, and it's compounded every year that those projects come online. For example, by the end of 25, 26, you're going to max out at 24, 25. You're looking at about 1.5 million.
Right, but that's the debt payment, which
Correct.
includes principal plus interest.
Correct.
You're gonna have to pay the principal regardless of whether you pay it cash or through the loan. My question is that how much of this is actually the interest? What is in excess of what if we paid for it with cash?
I don't think-
Calculated.
Yeah, I mean-
The projects minus the total.
Cost in this, to Tom's question, did the cost in this include the uplift for prevailing wage?
Yes.
Yeah.
Everything I put in there was.
So these numbers are prevailing wage based.
Even if we didn't think they were funded projects, we based it on 15 to 20% increase for state wage rates.
Thank you. I'm just trying to clarify.
Yeah, and exactly what I'm trying to get at is that what's the cost impact of debt interest payments specifically? And, to Earl's point, changing wage rates if we have to pay prevailing wage.
Looks like we're gonna have that shortly.
Well, that's the other thing with Cedar, while Kim's doing that. Originally, I think Darren's idea was to break it out as to like individual projects. I think one of the issues that you would have is that if you're going to get funding and you have, this is a massive project, it is all of a 3-year project because it encompasses the side streets. It does Midland, Massachusetts, East Market. It is everything. But that's also some of the oldest pipe. I mean, East Market, I believe, is nearing 100 years old. And I did it as one project to get it all done at one time instead of saying, well, we'll do 3 million here, we'll wait a couple of years, do 3 million here. Economies of scale, you put one contractor on there at one time. Paving happens at one time.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we discussed when we talked about the Cedar project was the economies of doing it at one time. So you're not opening the road multiple times, tapping into lines. And that kind of offsets some of the other things that we're talking about.
One of the things that I was looking this over, one of my concerns was our infrastructure is, what's been happening is showing us that we've got some problems. And is this encompassing what you think are real problems that we need to address? And what is lurking in the back of your mind that's not here?
Is that question to the engineer?
Well, I left it to the engineer because he's an engineer, but not you too. You
My
too.
honest opinion is, if you notice, some of the biggest projects are in build-out maintained roads. The roads that the cities maintain over the last 30 years, since I've been not tooting my own horn, it's just the way it's gone. Since I've been the city and board engineer, we've addressed so many city maintained streets and the infrastructure below ground. What we're left with is projects where, we're not repaving Kings Highway. We're not repaving Cedar Avenue. So those are the streets that we never really address the underlying infrastructure. So in my honest opinion, I think you're in really good shape. We're beginning to address those streets as part of this plan. On the flip side, like the wastewater plant, it was built in 2005 through 2007. So some of that equipment is beginning to its life expectancy is reaching the end. So we're gonna have those sorts of things pop up from time to time.
There's some engineering that's being, there's some changes that are being made at the headworks due to learning over the years of what works and what doesn't work. But the factor that, the underlying factor that nobody really talks about, which is now becoming prevalent, is supply chain. So for example, if we want to bid out the headworks, we're at the mercy of whatever the supply chain is. And it is like, for example, I came back and asked to purchase a truck knowing that we would take delivery on it the year that it's budgeted. But I had to order it at least 16 months ahead of time. And they guarantee you like a 5% swing in price because of what the cost of the time when they build it.
Yeah, no, I understand. And like, for instance, I remember the last meeting, one of the things that stuck in my mind was Mark saying that lift station number 4, one of the problems was 90-degree pipe, angles and pipes, and it was a poor design. So doesn't that tell you that that whole station needs to be really redone?
Which is what we have the funding and that's what we're doing.
So that's in here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think the study that's being started this week will give you a lot of indication on that.
That was my other question. The study is going to tell us more, maybe. So,
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I think the board's infrastructure is in good shape. We're beginning to address some of the locations that we haven't in the past because it really hasn't been in your purview to do it in terms of these street projects. There are some things that I wish would have been done and I recommended years and years and years ago, like the water tower. I just wish that were up and running. We've been really planning hydraulically for like making loops in our system to better serve not only future homes, but existing homes as well. So there's some things that we can improve on, but generally we're in good shape.
When you look at a lot of these costs, and then as Charlie said, if I can really think about it, we've paved probably almost every state road except for New Road. Because we're about to do Politown Road, we would have paved Kings. Or no, Kings was paid by the state. But a lot of those projects, Savannah Road was another one. That it's a large chunk of change when you start getting into the state roads.
I just want to throw this out there in terms of this Kings Highway versus Cedar Avenue prioritization discussion is that we know DelDOT's planning on widening Kings Highway as it comes in from Route 1 all the way to the Freeman Fork in the road. So in our plan, the way it's shown is that section of Kings Highway from BB all the way out to Gills Neck Road where the new medical center is, would be prioritized to get it in the ground before DelDOT does their project. We talked about where would DelDOT need to relocate our sewer or our water to do their project, but we don't think they would need to. Thinking that they would have to pay for it and that the board wouldn't, but we don't think they'd have to relocate the water just to do their widening project.
It may need to the electric side though.
And, on the supply chain, I know there's been some discussion about, is this the right time to do it or wait? And everything seen in the industry press, and Charlie, you can chime in. The expectation is that the supply chain is not going to recover in the next 2 years. This is not a short term, COVID goes away. The supply chain has drastically changed. And so we're stuck with the supply chain for the foreseeable future.
That's right.
I
totally agree. I don't totally understand it because I know the economy's kicking right now, but I feel like it's only kicking a little bit more than it was, say, 2 years ago. So why aren't we able to get our supplies and our equipment like we were 2 years ago? But it has to do with all these things. Well, there's not enough truck drivers. There's not enough people working in the production and manufacturing facilities, and there's not enough pieces of equipment to put together the whole piece.
Well, a lot of it's outside of the US's control.
That's right.
Because it's the ports on the other side, and it's, the lack of shipping containers, which is unbelievable because they're stranded all over, they're being used for storage. And so, this is not something that in 2022 we're going to see change.
I would say for planning purposes, that you plan on this going to be advanced supply chain for a couple of years.
Just to add a plug in there, that obviously if we're going to $45 million for the projects, we very well may have to expand our staff to be able to handle all of those projects. It's a lot. It's a lot.
So it's another factor that needs to be put into this.
It wouldn't be necessarily put into the capital.
No, but in the administrative side, yes.
Yes.
Our total payments would be 29.2 million, so it's about 5.4 million that we're paying over our projects.
5.1 million for the $23 million worth of loans,
23.8, yep.
and that's compounded over the 20-year life.
Correct.
Thanks.
So your priorities were, I think, were wastewater treatment plant, headworks, water tower.
Yep.
Which mimics what he was saying as well, hardened utilities, electric, and then mitigation as it relates to things like the batteries, and you said something else that I wrote down that I can't even understand.
Bidirectional flow,
Bidirectional flow.
mutual aid agreements, et cetera.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd add to that list? As far as priorities, top priorities.
Blank check for $44 million.
Wish we better play the lottery for that.
I know. No, it really, I could go on a list. I mean, it's just like when we looked at the $43 million, you got 20-something projects. The hard part is being able to go through and pick and prioritize which one makes sense. I think those are 4 avenues that make up, obviously on the stormwater side, you always have sea level rise. So that factors in, but that also correlates with most of all of your projects that you're doing, because you have to entertain that. You know, if you're opening up a road, Pilot Town Road, for example, you take that into consideration. So when you touch certain projects, Cedar being another one, it's such a large project that obviously you're going to take a look at stormwater too. So it's not saying that we're not as concerned with stormwater, but that stormwater falls into almost every project that we do where we touch a road or open up a road.
So what the 3 again, water tower, the bidirectional flow, and what?
I would look at like hardening your utilities, for example, tree trimming, because
Okay.
that's, if we get a hurricane or a tropical storm that comes through here, that's going to be a big issue. One, the water table is so high, so your trees being able to fall in your power lines, you want to make sure that they're trimmed back. You have mitigation measures, which has to do with like your wastewater treatment plant, talking about bidirectional flow or bypass valving at your pump stations. And then looking at like the water tower, that's for fire capacity, vertical storage. That would basically either 2-fold or 3-fold what we currently have in the air. And then also looking at the wastewater treatment plant, obviously looking at the headworks.
But the order that I think you put these in, and I'm just clarifying.
I went backwards on this one.
You did?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So wastewater treatment plant headworks was 1, water tower 2.
Yep.
Hardening of utilities, electric 3, and then mitigation, batteries, et cetera, for
Yes.
4.
It's bilateral flow in there.
It is a bilateral flow.
Bilaterals and mitigation. But again, if I'm in Denrick's shoes, I look at that as a project of a utility forward thinking, saying, I know that we have aging infrastructure, and if you have that force main go from 4 to the headworks, you have a plan in place. And Rehoboth was a prime example. Rehoboth did the same thing.
So the water tower,
Yes.
talk us through that as an emergency or as a second priority.
So really, when you're talking the water tower, we have 5 wells, and they have the capacity, but you're also, so we run off a tank level, and tank level is correlated with pressure. So obviously when demand kicks on, you have the wells that kick, and then it pushes water to the water tower and it fills up, and as it fluctuates.
I like when you talk to me like I'm 12, because I can actually understand that.
Can you go down a little?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. So we just did hydrant flushing, and we had to stop 2 or 3 times because we were drawing so much demand from that water tower that we were slowly bringing down the pressure. And then people throughout town experience low pressure. Having a 2-fold storage or 3-fold storage gives you that ability to have that vertically in the air. Also, in case of emergencies, when you talk about if something catastrophic were to happen at the well, mind you, we have mitigation measures with tide water. We have a connection with a valve there. But if something were to happen between the water tower and the wells, you have, depending on the time of day, 30 minutes or so to respond.
And we're without a water.
Correct. It's all based on demand. That's looking at it from a very, very
Well, and then the third-
catastrophic failure.
and then the third aspect is that when the water tower has to come out of service, like for service, painting, whatever, or if there was some catastrophic issue with the water tower, you then would be relying on strictly well pressure.
Correct. And we did that. When the tower went out of service, we switched it and we were running off the clay valve. So we've done that. We prefer to run on
That was
tower.
for a couple of weeks, wasn't it?
That was for a couple of months.
Couple of months.
Yeah, when they were doing the internal cleaning.
We have to choose because we did that off season,
Correct.
but if it happened during season, we would be in much more tough situation.
Yes. Which is again why we went and we did the whole Jones Farm purchase as a lateral purchase between the city and the county and us, and we have that parcel that's specifically for the water tower when that time comes. But
It's another single failure.
yes, yeah,
I mean, you're spot on, Austin, everything you say, it's what we call equalizing reserve related to elevated storage tanks that based on the peak demand that you saw quite high peak demands this past summer, being able to equalize that flow. So, what was happening this past summer is that from the top of the operating range in the tank to the bottom of the operating range, there wasn't much time, which would change if you had a 4 million gallon tank out at the Jones Farm. But the other factor is I want to add in is just fire reserve. Just if something were to happen, you have to have all that up in the air so that you have that much more water that you can provide to a fire. Again, I'll say I recommended a new tower, 750,000 gallons in 2002. The board's been sort of operating on the premise that if you can get emergency generation to each of the well field wells, you can use the aquifer as your emergency flow if you need it. I never loved that idea. I'd rather have it up in the air.
Does it lose pressure though when you do that?
So
If you're just pumping, I guess you're pumping up into the tower. Never mind. Okay. Never mind.
yeah, I just never. That's not the way that we conservative engineers would do it. So I'm glad that we're at this point where we're considering the tower.
and then you got to find your bottlenecks. Obviously, you're going to be constricted to wherever your pipe sizing is. So that would be your next. You start stepping down the line. It's a supply chain thing.
But just to clarify, Earl, too, is you actually be bypassing the water tower
Yeah.
and pumping directly from the wells and using the wells as pressure control.
Okay. I didn't get that. Thank you. So those are what we do. What don't we do?
As far as
Priorities.
what's the board decision?
Any
That's
recommendations?
that's the tough part. That's where we would have to sit down and you would take priorities. Obviously, you have the expansion for developments. Those are contractual agreements. Then you would start to go, like, for an example, the canal crossing. That was actually hit through a project, the Del Dot construction of the bridge. And there was a Band-Aid that was placed on it. It's not a forever fix, but that's one of those where it's a priority to have that redundancy, because we have 3 lines that go across. 2 are at the Savannah Road Bridge, and 1 is down at C.H. Mason's Way across the canal.
Did Del ever agree to do a permanent fix on that?
I do not believe so. It was just a Band-Aid
I
at
would
the
think the
time.
ARPA funds could come into play there potentially.
Again, yeah.
I mean, we didn't cause that problem.
No, we did not. So these are all kind of discussion topics. It's hard to just say, well, we're going to push this one, we're going to push this one, which is why we're trying to camera as much or as many sewers as we can. We team up when the city does their street improvement projects. On the water side, obviously, we're trying to put a well or a tower up. And the water pipe set assessment will kind of, just like we just did hydrant flushing and Cedar, look pretty good. that will either confirm or kind of contradict what we assume is going on in that area.
You know, does Dawn, when she does this, I should know this. Does she discount like, I mean, we have about $1 million worth of vehicles in this budget. I mean, that includes backhoes and other things, but, and most of the non-construction vehicles won't last 20 years. So why, does she break that out so we're not financing, you know, a 10-year vehicle over 20 years? So we're breaking that out, so we're not funding it improperly? Is there any, does that take into account at all?
Well, we always, every vehicle that we purchase, we pay cash for. So we're paying ourselves back a depreciation on whatever that cost is. So that's factored into, for example, the minimum cash reserve policy. I think Dawn doesn't assume that you finance them because we don't. We just pay ourselves back in depreciation so that we can fund that.
Well, the recent vehicles we bought,
Mhm.
did we correlate that with what was in the depreciation pool? I mean, did we actually look at that?
Yeah, we always do 10. So, and we're gonna look at expanding that. But like, for example, we just bought the new truck that Rhett drives,
Right.
the bucket truck. That was a 20-year-old vehicle, so it's fully depreciated. Now, the cost of that vehicle back then is a lot different than what it is today. For
So
example,
what that truck cost? Just,
you mean the new one?
no, yeah,
210,000.
okay. I guess my question is, did we go to that depreciation pool and knowingly pull it out of there? I mean, was there 200,000 to pay for that in the depreciation pool for that item? I mean, is it actually working the
Meaning,
way it's supposed
like
to
if
be?
you're depreciating over 20 years, how you fund your depreciation? Are you pulling from your depreciated funds to pay for that asset?
Well, we're accounting for that expense in here.
And we say we're doing
But
that.
the depreciation takes every year there's depreciation.
Yeah.
So it's not, there's a budget that gets saved for depreciation specifically for trucks, I assume. It's just part of the
It's just
depreciation.
all the assets.
Not that great.
Yeah.
So is there anything in this budget for stormwater management in areas where we don't have? I don't see a whole lot.
So we have the biggest issue that we have right now is relining, and it's mainly in Pilottown Village. It's old corrugated pipe. A lot of the infrastructure was built over top of, which makes it hard for us to get equipment back there. So we have to utilize lining of pipes. That is not a cheap fix. As far as we don't necessarily have, for example, cedar, right? If we were going to do cedar as far as stormwater, the discussion is, do we do porous pavement or do we put in a full-blown stormwater system? Which, Charlie, you looked at that back when Bay Avenue happened, and that was 5.6 million. You're still going to fight the same issues, which is where does the water go?
Right, but I think it still needs to be part of the discussion.
Yes.
Because we're going to be pushed. If MS4 comes along, how do we deal with that? So I think it still has to be part of this discussion.
Yes.
So your 44 million may not be enough.
Depending on what projects we want to expand on, for example, cedar, if we want to put on a full-fledged.
There's almost no stormwater management over on the beach. So I think looking at that is going to be an issue that's going to have to be talked about.
I don't get too specific, but I know when I was on the Overfalls board and we built a slip, that pipe coming down like Ship Carpenter Street, I mean, was very, very old corrugated pipe where it ended to slip.
Right.
And I just wonder what that pipe is. It's either it may have been a 42 inch. Is it?
I think it is 42.
Yeah.
You can still see it right there.
Type of correlation, the way it was
Right.
but we together.
Right.
And I just wonder what condition that damn pipe.
Well, that could be scoped to just take a look at it, but
And
anyway.
I
think
will
it's some-
say, as an all-encompassing statement, is that The BPW's infrastructure is what we'd be talking about here, right? The water has to get there, which goes back on streets.
Right.
So it's a two-phase, the relationship between the BPW and the city is great. That would have to continue because when you're talking about over on the beach side, you have these new homes that are being built and their elevation is higher than their neighbors. As the water comes off of those homes and goes into the street, there is no curb and gutter. So even if you were to put a stormwater system in, it's much more than just saying, oh yeah, we're going to put $5 million into a stormwater system because the water's got to get there.
Well, there's the practicality, as you pointed out, as to whether where a stormwater management system would actually be engineeringly feasible
Yes.
without going to a pump system.
That's exactly, it's not as easy, specifically on that side of town, it's not as easy to just say.
It's not just laying pipe.
No.
Okay. Great numbers, and we're going to try to prioritize what we have, or we want to have Dawn take a look at what it is now, what that would mean, then come back and prune it.
So is 45, I don't think is a livable number. Or 44 million. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah.
So if there are things we can take off this list and have her say, come back and say, okay, given that winnowed down list, and it won't be winnowed down a lot. And having her say, okay, here's what your rates increase need to be, here's your funding. We could do, I think that would save us some time if there's things we wanted to take off this list.
And what we would do is if we were to do that, what we would do is we would give her one with no funding so that she can come back and confirm how much funding we need. So if she comes back and says, well, you need to post a bond or you need to get funding for $20 million, you can sit here and say, well, this is what we came up with and it funds for $23 million. So you have that portion fixed, and then she'll say, okay, if you fund 20 million and you need a 10% rate increase here, a 10% rate increase here, you do it.
You could also do it backwards. You would just say, give us the amount that we can do with this threshold, with this amount of rate increase, this amount of this increase, and say, give us the number, and then we can go through the projects then if we want.
You know, the capital budget is not carved in stone, and I'm not sure we could take what Austin has come up with for what he thinks is immediate. I mean, in a sense, if I'm reading it properly.
It changes every single day.
Yeah, no, I realize that.
It's something new.
That's why a budget isn't carved in stone, because you all of a sudden you run into something you didn't even know about.
I guess it is.
But I'm not
prioritized by
sure.
year. I mean, you really do have a prioritization of sorts
So
by year.
this is assuming the current rate structure. This is not assuming what Dawn had presented, I don't remember when, a meeting or two ago, with an increase.
This is assuming Dawn never presented.
Right.
It is the current state.
Yes.
Charlie, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So, it seems to me that, I mean, I'm not sure we have enough information at this point. I think maybe to Earl's point, we need to have her come back with what it would take to do this with just rate increases, what it would take with partial funding bonds. And then we could sit down and prioritize, because I actually don't have a good feel for what the impact of this is on the customers at this point.
Yes.
I mean,
She could actually come up with a scenario that says these are reasonable increases for your situation too, and give you that.
because
Yes, I could give you either.
yeah, I mean,
Great.
we know we're not pushing the rates right now. So as part of the rebuilding, partial rate increases may be part of the solution, and it would solve having to go out for $23 million worth of bonds. So, I mean, I personally would like to see some more information on that side. I think you've done a great job of laying out where we are and the costs, but I don't quite understand the funding side yet.
Well, the only reason that I threw the funding in there is essentially So the whole point of the cash reserve is a funding mechanism for the board to understand, okay, if you fluctuate in your O&M, if you fluctuate in your depreciation, if you fluctuate in your capital budget, it affects your minimum cash reserve. Once you dip below that, so let's just say you take this 44 million and you say, this is what we're going to go with. The day that you decide that's what you're going to do, your new capital budget or your new cash reserve is 2.5 million unfunded. And all it is a trigger mechanism for decisions.
Yeah, I mean,
I just did it as a theoretical.
right, and it didn't mean any aspersion here. I'm saying it's just to move to the next step.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, prioritizing until we understand what the rate bonding impacts are, seems like we're not working on all the information.
I kind of use it as like a possibility almost. So like just as a thought, if you finance this 23, this is what it would look like from a cash reserve and a capital budget standpoint. As an example, it wasn't really to tell you which one is the best.
Charlie, would our actual, what we decide upon impact the state's opinion of what they'll fund? I mean, if we cut things out of here and then would they say if we went in for that bigger pot that was larger than the 5-year budget, would that kind of probably make sure that we wouldn't get any money over this? You know what I'm saying? How much impact of what we end up with will that, how would that impact these states?
I don't think it would impact, if you were to submit applications for the entire $44 million worth of projects that you wanted to submit state revolving fund applications, and then decided not to do some of those projects, I don't think it would put the board in bad light.
They would come back looking at this and say, well, you don't have that in here, so we're not going to fund it.
Yeah, I would say that you would rather want to submit the applications so that they have them in their files for 2 reasons. One, you might get some funding that you like, or you might decide to do the project. But secondly, they utilize all that information to go back to the federal government the next year to get even more money. If they know what the projects are that are in everybody's backlog, they use that to go out for more funding from the federal government.
So it would be a benefit to keep it in our budget. Is that
It
what
would be a benefit to submit the applications, I would say.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that you have them in hand, and then, like the things we were just talking about, they would have notice of it. You don't have to commit to any particular project until the time comes when it gets approved and into the funding threshold area, like I was talking about before. You can always back out.
When do they make decisions?
So the pre-applications are typically due in January, and they develop the project priority list from the pre-applications that are submitted in January, but we usually know what that is by April. And then you know if you're going to be in the below or above the threshold funding line for whatever particular project. A lot of times the board has obviously more than one project that they've submitted applications for. One of them might be above the threshold line, one of them might end up below.
that wouldn't be the same schedule for ARPA funds necessarily, right?
I don't know what the ARPA fund is yet. Yeah, I can't answer that question, and hopefully we'll get, my crystal ball tells me Greg's gonna say he doesn't know a whole lot. Not a whole lot more than what he's, but maybe I might be wrong. We'll see what he says.
Okay.
Well, we also, everyone's reading the crystal balls as to what's going to be in the infrastructure and the Build Back Better plan,
Yeah.
because that is so fluid. So to your point, having a larger list, if there's more funding out there, would seem to behoove us. I mean, it's not like we're committing to it, but we're.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I know when, it's called in 2008, what was that funding called? Do you remember, Vince?
Oh,
That's what I was gonna say, like, with that kind of funding, they do like projects that are like shovel ready or ready to, they're almost ready to go out for bid, which the board's in pretty good shape on, like Cedar Avenue. We've done a lot of work on Cedar Avenue already. So if that were to happen, we could put it in there and have it shovel ready pretty quick.
If we put it into our plan, then we would have to adjust our reserve policy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think Tom's idea is a good one, have her run these and then come back to us, then start pruning things.
It's okay.
One thing to do, maybe because it's just a model that she's gonna put together, is do a $44 million model, a 23 and a 34. So you have three different things to say, because there's reasonable rates, and that's gonna kind of be the same. And then the rest becomes funding.
Okay with that, but she would need to know whether it's electric, water, or sewer, because it's three different rate studies.
That's true.
So I like the idea of bounding it, but I'm not sure how Dawn would do it.
Yeah, because you have rate increases.
I think if we ask her to do one for the whole pot, like we said, to see what the worst case scenario is, and then do one that she feels is reasonable increases for our various utilities for where we are, get her recommendation.
And that would give us the two bounds, yeah.
Let me go back to what I started with. Do you think, it's not big numbers, but do you think we should take some of these items out that aren't really, or are they or aren't they capital items? Like the nutrient thing and the
I think that,
transformer replacements and.
yeah, things that are in the O&M budget, seems to me like we're double.
Darren had a system that, I think you were there when you first came on, we were talking to him about, he switched things from the capital budget to the operating budget. And we couldn't figure it out, and Jack didn't know how to do it either. I think that these were probably some of the things that he was doing. Moving them during the year from one budget to the other.
Yeah, and that to me seems like it
Yeah,
just
that's-
confuses things.
I agree with.
You're not capitalizing tree trimming.
Right. So, I think we should go through here and take anything that's a regular thing every year, put it in the operations and maintenance budget. And then just things that are really capital things that are going to be lasting, you do it once and it's good for a longer period of time.
And the transformers we're replacing on an as-needed basis with the new stainless steel transformers, so.
We just actually purchased the transformers for all Powhatan Road because the lead time on it was 4 months, 5 months.
I think it was 16 to 18 weeks.
Again, looking at stainless steel because we did the same thing on Bay and Cedar.
But I think we were doing something in advance, even demand, weren't we? We just had a policy, we were going to replace
Yes.
all these over, and was built into the budget. So to me, that's an operations
Right.
type thing. So if you could go through this and see which ones you think fit into that category.
I will.
And then I think, I would put the Lewes Circle. It's a small project. I put that big, that's been
Back in?
a headache for a long time over there. School lane, I'm not sure what the real problem is there. I haven't heard that much about that one.
It was mainly with one, it seemed to be with one customer, and it's not really kind of blossomed into much of any sort of ongoing issue that I know of.
And I'd be okay with that. Is there, are we agreed upon the approach? Yep. Richard, you haven't said much today. That's unusual for you. Yeah. You have lines churning in there. You're good with that?
We are, we want to authorize Dawn to run several scenarios on as large a budget as we can based on what Darren and Kim have put together.
Austin. I know, I do it.
Austin's better looking.
Yeah, Derek's not here.
and have Austin just remove things that really should be in the operating budget. And proceed on that basis.
We'd get the worst case scenario based on
And
present.
one or two other scenarios that would be helpful for us to then move forward. I think what Austin and Kim have done is put together this bare bones versus the vision of what BPW really needs. And cutting down on the vision is a peril that I think we want to avoid.
Charlie,
I just want to add one thing with regard to your concern about breaking it out for the electric, water, wastewater, and stormwater. I feel that we can do that, can't we? Kind of take this and prioritize the projects into the various categories, 23, 34, and 44, and have them prioritized in terms of the various utilities. I feel like we can do that. Do you think, Austin?
I just almost did it right here.
Yeah. For Dawn's purposes.
Yeah.
I just want to throw that out there.
thanks, Charlie.
Well, I mean, well, so obviously it's all done for the $44 million.
Yeah.
But if you go to 33, you then have to start culling which ones.
Yeah.
I mean, because is it majority water? Is it majority, that's the one that I was more concerned about.
Gotcha.
No, I mean, I think what's here is completely broken out by rate categories.
Okay, so we agree to that, just a consensus. Okay.
And then the other thing was, would you need to add any people associated with this process? Project management, whatever it is, I don't know.
And it's something that we're putting out there, yeah.
You're right. Okay. Anybody, does anybody in our audience have any questions? I see, Tim, do you have any questions?
Not that I want to hear right now.
Ed, do you have any questions? Or comments? I don't.
No, this is, hi, I'm Barbara Curtis, and this is the first meeting I've attended. I keep meaning to be here, but I do work, so it's a little difficult. My big question, I'm very concerned about sustainability, and I worry about the wastewater treatment plant and its location. And I know this is a long-term kind of issue, but are there plans to, in the future, is there thought of moving it somewhere else when it gets to the end of its useful life? So that's just
We're evaluating
a huge capital issue.
what we're looking at. It's sustainability going forward, and we haven't come to a conclusion of what needs to be done to fortify it well enough to operate, during various storms and so forth. So we haven't finalized anything there, but we're certainly aware of it. We're certainly interested in what could happen down there. No decision has been made or even discussed seriously about moving it. I think this is just I think, a project like that would be very tough to do, to find a site for it. The cost would be, Charlie, I've been throwing out at least $100 million by the time he did it. Yeah, so it would be a very expensive project. I mean, if we could do it where we are now, I think there's ways of attacking the issue down there. Obviously, treatment plants are usually put at the lowest point in the city or wherever they are, because it flows downhill, as they say. So that's the reason it's probably started there. But I think there's things we could do to be sure that give us higher confidence that it'll sustain reasonable storms that we could anticipate.
I guess the other point would be is that, you talked, and I think that's very critical of the end of useful life. And this 5-year plan takes us out to 2026, which is well before the end of the useful life of the plant. Now, when you get to the point of a major rebuild, that, as Press pointed out, is something we're evaluating.
You have to pump everything to a different location, which would be a major project in itself. And then finding a site that would be suitable, particularly in today's world where there's very little land left, and any land that's left is so expensive. They've talked about ocean outfall. I think we heard it's paid $40 million or something like that for that several years ago. The spray irrigation has been talked about. I calculated you probably need 350 acres or more for a system like that, if you can find the land. You may have to pump it out the long neck like the county does. So it would be a very difficult thing to do. So we're looking at what we have now and what we could do with it to reinforce it.
Yeah, I wonder, do we take ideas from, the Netherlands where they've held back the sea? Because I'm thinking more long-term, when that will be below water at some point in the future, if this world doesn't do something about sea level rise.
Right.
And, certainly there are countries like the Netherlands that operate below sea level. And if we can harden the wastewater treatment plant so that it can do that, that would be great.
That's
Might be the
a
simplest.
possibility. We haven't gotten to that.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that is part of what, GMB has done, is look at the lowest elevations of the plant.
Mhm.
And exactly as you pointed out, we need to look at where the vulnerabilities are, and can it be done by elevation, diking, or whatever,
Yeah.
for the long term. Because, I think I am very, very concerned about sea level rise and climate change. And, we want to make sure we address that. And that's part of the evaluation we are doing. Okay.
That's in our vision. We know that's out there. And we're not just passing it off. We're serious about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. We don't get many people who attend our meetings. Thank you very much.
Just one comment. I've lived in the Netherlands, and actually there's a group over from the Netherlands over at the University of Delaware today, having a conversation around sea level rise. So if you can, it starts at, I think, 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
You can either log in and go into the site and listen to it. I think the attendance is full at this time. There are differences of opinion on the board, and there should be, because those differences allow for conversation and debate, and then the board makes a vote. I am of the belief that plant does need to be moved, and I believe that we should ask for funding in order to do a study to decide when and where that plant could be taken to. So there are people with different levels of concerns and issues, and that's the way boards should run. And I just want you to know that as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, if that's it, then we'll accept the motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
All in favor? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paula.